Welcome again to the Great Witness, Kevin the Great Witness show. The New Adventure series is, and we're here with Kevin from the UK. I'm Dean Bell, and we're going to hear from Kevin. You have two experiences today, Kevin?
Yeah, I have two experiences. One is quite long, the other one much shorter. So
get to listen and comment and ask questions if anybody else gets on particularly. And so we'll give it to you, Kevin. Thank you for being here and sharing and taking the time to write your experiences down. Must take a while, so thank you.
This real side experience would begin in my street, my physical level street, where my house lies, recreated here. As I have recounted previously, there had been extensive alterations and adjustments made to my house on the real side, the house which represents the personal self, to the extent that even walls were bulldozed down and the roof removed by the real guides. The agreed upon and necessary adjustments and refinements of the personal self to align it better with the real intent of the real awareness, and the constant removing of old and restricting agreements and attachments in the form of garbage and trash being ejected from the house. For the process of awareness, of recognizing the old idea attachments and agreements that don't make sense with life or work anymore, and their subsequent release, is a constant. And as we proceed, we might expect the personal self representing house to become less, as we let go more of the personal self, to get to a stage eventually where we consider nothing through it, and only use it as a vehicle to operate in creation. And then, at that point, I'd imagine the personal self house may look like a derelict building, maybe one that is just an outward shell perhaps. Then again, the consciousness, as it is constructed up until that point, will still be there. It's just that we are no longer considering and holding on to the ideas that make up its construction. So I suppose the personal self house will always be there, except one day we might never return to it, that it might fade away as the personal self does. Also, my street had been considerably widened by the real guides, as they were operating various excavating vehicles to make this so in a few real side experiences I had previously recounted. This was a representation of my agreement to facilitate a greater access into my street and to my personal self house. In other words, open to accepting of a far greater influx of individuals into my personal creational experience, which is to be expected as we continue to share and reach more people on the real side, and filtering through to the physical, as their personal selves decide to proceed with their real awareness and guide nudges they have received, and as they undoubtedly then come across references of the true reality in whatever form they do on the physical, references that will feature in their physical level experience as their real awareness makes the decision to become more aware and recognize the ease. And so it was here that my street was full of individuals, the number of which it could not have contained, at least not comfortably, had it not been widened and expanded by the real guides. The individuals were in varying degrees of awareness, from one end of the spectrum to the other. A fair majority were relatively unaware, but were open to what I had to share with them, as they were, after all, entering my street, and had no other agendas or ill-intended inclinations, as were my impressions. So really, it was as though this large group of individuals were approaching me on the real side initially, and perhaps then we might expect to see them step up on the physical level, if their personal selves proceed and go with it. Also, a percentage of the overall group of arrivals had been brought in by Jeremy, and it fell upon he and I to address this overall group, to answer their questions, and then to let them decide. The questions were very extensive, and I would go over much by way of the construction of simulated creation, its various levels, referencing the true reality, the real guides, and impressing upon them as best as I was able that everything is awareness, everything is about awareness, and the real awareness that they and we all are, that is this isness. An isness that is the real purpose to recognize and stand in the reality of. There was a mixed reaction and acceptance, some very open to it and keen to learn more, others more dubious, others more sceptical, and all had various idea baggage they had with them that they would attempt to fit in with what I was presenting, which of course wouldn't work, as no creationally based ideas have anything to do with the isness other than a comparative reference for what the is not, and as you can imagine, many there had come through the various religions, spiritual paths, and some were adamant to cling on to the ideas of these, and somehow align them with the real references of the is. But regardless, Jeremy and I both would creatively put our real references to them in ways that we sensed would be best understood according to what each individual had come through. There was a small group within the larger group who had come through a very curious spiritual path indeed. I was unable to fully grasp the specifics of it, but it seemed to be a very ethereal level and vehicle, psychic manipulation orientated practice, the use of magic, etc. These were the most difficult group to share with, to the point where I felt it unlikely they would agree to stepping beyond this spiritual practice they had embraced. But then, we are not here to convince anybody, just to give them the opportunity, not to impose on others. But they, after all, like all those here in the street, had ventured here by their own volition and choice, and for this reason, to listen to what Jeremy and I had to say. This spiritual group also had shape-shifting capabilities, so I can imagine all these exciting, thrill-orientated skills would be somewhat hard to let go of, or at least put aside enough to allow life and the real guides to enter their experience and assist their awareness process. Something the guides can't do if you're locked in the cocoon of your self-convinced consciousness, as that is almost like an impenetrable barrier on the real side, where nothing other than what you have clung to through your personal self can feature. At a certain point, Duane joined our overall group also. He would stand back and watch as everything unfolded as it did, just like a parent, as they give the children room to experience and experiment, to go through their learning process, adventures, make the mistakes they will, etc., and become more aware through them. For we become more adept, capable, we learn to handle ourselves better, and become ever more self-sufficient as we deal with all the situations we are confronted with, more so ourselves, as we go about our process of awareness, the guides and Duane giving us the space to do so, but always nearby if we get into a difficulty, and will step in accordingly. There was one individual from the curious spiritual group who presented as their champion, if you will, and he couldn't accept that through real awareness he would be more capable than he is with all the various creational-based psychic manipulation skills he had learned, and to prove his point, he challenged me to a duel. And as I said, this group were shapeshifters also, and so his eyes would turn bright red as he prepared to transform into some mighty formidable beast or other to combat me with. Perhaps Duane could see that I was tempted to do just this, but to do so would be rather unproductive, and resolve nothing really, if I were to engage this individual creationally, as this is what I would have to do. I could stand in my real awareness isness, reality, position, and be beyond his reach, beyond any effects that he could feature in, but to duel him would require my having to engage with him on a creational idea-to-idea arena, and all that would come from creational conflict would be unnecessary effects. Unnecessary in that the effects are not beneficial, awareness speaking. Examples of beneficial effects being that which we create through the sharing of the is, that we do, that requires the cause and effect mechanic to make it so in creation. And so Duane did step in, as though to break up two children that are about to squabble, and he would speak to the champion of the spiritual group privately, taking him to one side, and whatever Duane conveyed seemed to settle this individual. Also, there would be a Native American individual arriving on the scene in his full regalia, headdress and such, and would further seemingly encourage this spiritual group, almost as though reinforcing their emotional attachment to the ideas of it, as he would proclaim how each of them had an animal altar, whereby they had reached a certain stage where they could assume these mythological type body forms, dragons, golden lions, etc., and that each would have wings that enabled them to fly. Of course, certain of the animals, like the dragons, would already have that ability. It's as though this spiritual group were beginning to come around by fractions to what we had presented, and what Duane had said in addition. But then this Native American Indian's presence, and what he spoke of, recaptivated the spiritual group's attention, and they rather lost all interest in becoming more aware. As they became excitable about this new idea that would be in addition to their psychic science skill set. So very possibly a dark force Native American Indian, or just a personal self-immersed individual with the influence operating through him, deployed to worm his way in and rob people of their opportunity by enticing and seducing them with the most likely idea that will have them deciding to remain chasing thrills in creation. As such, this spiritual group would vanish from the scene, from the street, along with the Native American Indian, and so they had made their decision. For those that remained, they now all began to have the ability to fly, as though their decision to become more aware had given them wings, a representation of beginning to be elevated above what they had creationally resigned themselves to up until that moment, and we all would fly up and down the street with varying degrees of success and elevation according to each individual's intent at that moment, as of course it would take time, and the process to get the personal self aligned with the real awareness intent to afford them each better the real awareness oversight of creation, but by virtue of the continued presence of those in the street, this revealed that they were willing to at least begin the process of awareness. Also, there would be one individual who arrived in the street who is a current new friend, but he seemed oblivious to what was happening in his surroundings. I would try and get his attention, but he seemed glazed of eye, and even was bundling into people and looking confused, as though he couldn't understand why he was encountering resistance as he moved. We all watched as he shambled off, and then vanished from the scene, his focus quite clearly somewhere else. But then a huge mechanical rocket ship descended from the skies, and all the newly arrived individuals in the street were in a panic, for indeed they and I could impression that this represented a dark force attack of a kind, designed to cause disruption, fear, and put these individuals off from their process before it had barely begun. A good time to strike, as at the early stages of awareness, individuals are at their most vulnerable, less capable, and more easily scared off. The rocket ship seemed to be belching fire down upon the terrified street masses, and so I raised my hands and blasted blue light. The light seemed to have a freezing, icy component to it, like that individual from the X-Men, and nullified then the fire that was being produced by the rocket ship. I followed the ship down the street, continuing to freeze the fire it exuded, and ultimately then engulfing the ship in the blue light that it exploded. Duane would step forward again and speak to how he had the impression that one of the creational gods of man had been personally behind this attack, and that as a result of his rocket ship being destroyed, this god was enraged. I'm unsure which life-level reptilian god was responsible, but it's as though Duane somehow shifted the entire street from where it was to somewhere else. This street setting was rather within the personal arena of the real side, for it rather had to be, as these newly arriving individuals had very little awareness and recognition at this stage of their process. So such a gathering had to take place that was within their recognitional range, but as such, this place was susceptible to attack and dark force intervention, and due to the rage of this particular life-level god, Duane felt it prudent to protect everyone here, to somehow relocate this entire street into a kind of dimensional safe zone, almost as though a temporary pocket dimension beyond the possibility of dark force infringement. However, there seemed to be now a large mirror that manifested at the end of the street, and we all clustered around it to look. Appearing in the mirror would be the outraged face of the very reptilian god who had been thwarted, his face constantly changing from male to female. I suspect the female face was the influence working through him, as it does every being in creation. He roared and sputtered threats and obscenities, but this was all he could do. We were beyond his reach, aside from this mirror that he could unleash his tirade of abuse on us through. As long as we stayed where we were safe. But then this god's eyes fixed upon mine, and he challenged me to prove that real awareness and the capability it provides can trump and best his creational power. And he invited me to step through the mirror, which apparently was a means to reach his position and prove my might. As with most of these dark force characters, when we begin to operate from our real positions of awareness beyond the cause and effect of creation on the real side, or can move into it at any given moment, all they can really do is bait you into a creation, into your personal self, that they can attack you through the effects you now step into as you agree with the potential conflict they present you with. Duane would shake his head and advise me against doing so, and it's interesting that a mirror was the portal through to where this angry god dwelt. As creation is very much a reflection of the is, and it's almost as though this was represented here. We seemed to be temporarily in a kind of isness safe zone, regardless of our recognition of the is, and there was the mirror reflecting the is as the creation that this reptilian god resided in, that we must cross into if he is to be able to contend with us on a creational basis. But despite Duane's advice, I stepped through the mirror. I'd never confronted a god before, after all, and that would be quite the experience. Although I didn't find myself where I expected to be. I was back in the same street I had previously been in, although now I was alone, and the skies far darker, the setting more gloomier, but no god to be seen. Presumably, I had stepped into my personal self more so, that I could engage with whatever created ideas came my way, and be involved in the effects of. I came upon a vehicle that had crashed into a building, and curious, I pulled open the doors to look inside. There, slumped at the wheel, and in the seat beside it, were two reptilians, very much reptilian also, of greeny, scaled skin, tails, elongated lizard-like snouts. The one that had not been driving was completely unconscious as I checked his vitals, and seriously injured, it would seem. The reptilian that had been driving, equally as injured, but not completely unconscious, for as I checked him over, he hissed and snapped his teeth at me, as though, in automatic reaction to pain I had caused him as I checked him over. But in fact, I had no impression of ill intent from either, quite the opposite, and took it upon myself to assist them. As I decided this, 2 other reptilians appeared beside the crashed vehicle. They waited patiently, as though for instruction. Reptilians are mostly telepathic, but they do have language also. And now I spoke in their lizard language to these 2 other reptilians, and instructed them as to what medical equipment I would require, that which is suitable and designed for reptilian physiology. I reeled off a list of items, all in reptilian language. My personal self, having no knowledge of reptilian language, at least not in this current lifetime of memory filed references, and so this was very much my real awareness taking the reins of the situation, with its overview of all things and lifetimes creationally lived, and plucking forth the language required and the know-how of how to treat an injured reptilian. But then, before the other 2 reptilians, tasked with bringing me these supplies, could return, another vehicle screeched around the corner, and my impression was that those driving it were dark force characters of ill intentions. My overall impression was that the life-level god had baited me through the mirror. My agreement had culminated in the effects now being played out. It was a trap of a kind, agreement facilitating the inclusion of these dark force attackers in my experience, and these injured reptilians perhaps had been made so to distract me and keep me in this location until the dark forces could arrive. Innocent enough were the reptilians in this whole affair, but unwillingly part of a kind of setup. For now the dark force agents were hurtling toward me in a very formidable-looking military armored vehicle with murderous intentions. I rather had to lift the injured reptilian driver, place him in the back seat, shut the doors, and take to the wheel. Then what followed was a kind of car chase scenario, as the armoured dark force truck pursued me and my injured reptilian passengers around and through the streets. In the end, I found myself cornered, and the dark force armour truck would plough into my vehicle, and everything exploded into a heap of smoke and metal. the dust settled, there I was unscathed. Real awareness protection, generally ensuring our survival in all real side situations. But both the reptilians, who had been injured but still alive, now were dead, including the two dark force agents who had rammed into us. But again, my real awareness seemed to know what to do. Curiously, I pressed my hand into each of the dead individuals in turn, an area around the base of the spine. Within each, I would find a kind of a button, and I knew this was a reset switch, and pressing each of these reset switches in turn would restore each of these individuals back to life. It's almost as though, as with anything on the real side, as we become more aware, we can redo scenes and situations and experiences. We can go back in and make favourable adjustments that are more beneficial, or perhaps render an outcome that isn't necessarily better or worse, but one that we can become more aware through. And if this involves other people, we of course can't impose upon their experience. We can't alter or manipulate their situations or violate their free will to have the experiences the way they want or have decided. But here it was as though I had agreement from these four individuals. I felt as though I had permission in some way, as though a communication between my real awareness and theirs. And so I reset their body vehicles in this literal, representational way, which had them each fully restored to life, as though their collective experience that had these four intertwined with each other through their agreements and had culminated in their deaths had been reversed, rerun, as though it never had happened. They had agreed through their real awarenesses that I reset the experience for their personal selves, as though, due to these four being very personally self-immersed, as was my impression, despite the differences in their decided upon consciousnesses, the reptilians here very much the good guys, and the agents the bad guys, each having no awareness beyond their personal selves, they were unable to reset experiences for themselves. In other words, on a level of them that they didn't recognize, their real awareness, they had decided differently than what they had, and this translated as this experience of my resetting the experience as though none of it had happened, the part involving these four at any rate, as the real side always represents what we or others are deciding at the moment we have the view of it, and so decision and choice change would translate as an immediate alteration to that being viewed on the real side, as in this case, an experience then that never was. And then the reptilians and the dark force agents faded away, and I had the impression that even the dark force agents had had a change of heart too, that maybe they would continue to decide differently, as though tired of being the minions of others and carrying out their foul deeds. The experience ended there, and I never encountered the angry god in the mirror, and what transpired was obviously a kind of a trap, though rather a feeble effort, and as is always the case, it's unfortunate how other innocent beings are dragged into and embroiled into such situations as these particular reptilians were. But then nothing happens without agreement and decision, and the experiences these reptilians have are equally by their decided design, through the various agreement ideas they cling to, and that incorporate their consciousness.
So the real guides won't enter into our experience. They are to be allowed in there, or at least some kind of agreement has to be made for that to happen. And we see people that are building walls. People can make really, thick walls around themselves with their ideas, so nothing can penetrate. And we just let those people be, with whatever they want to be. Everybody has free will. We're not here to, like you say, convince people. Better not, there's some notes I copied down as you're talking. Better not to be in any group. Paul said that once, Paul Twitchell. Better not to belong to anything rather than to belong to something and kind of get carried away with it. Sometimes that's not to your benefit. So I know people that are just kind of like, I don't know if they're agnostics, but they just don't really, they just live here in the creation but without having an agenda or a belief system. And in a way, I see how that could be better, so to speak, better for them in the long run, because they're more open to things that come along, and maybe in their experience in creation, a window will open up for them, and it does for people sooner or later, and they'll be able to take the opportunity more so than a person who is steeped in their religious belief or spiritual belief, which may take lifetimes to get through. And again, they're not negating anything, that sometimes we just need to be adamant with something, to believe something, but in the end, it doesn't serve the person unless you get through it, because it doesn't go anywhere except to a recognition if you so decide that. And it's never what you think it is. You mentioned that too along the way here. And I find that very interesting. It's never what you think it is. It's always new now. So this relationship with this isness is never what you think it is or going to be. The personal self cannot possibly consider it how it is. So it's just moment by moment. It's always fresh and new. It's really cool the way it is. And despite what Duane said in the real side, you still went in, so that again demonstrates we have free will, no matter. And I know Duane's had experiences with the guides remember that one where he had on the wharf in Huntington Beach where they stood in his path and he was going out toward the ocean and they stood in front of him and blocking his way, and he said, "Get the F out of here, get the F out of my way." Kind of a test, even in his position, they were seeing what he would do. So even if the real guide comes up with something for you, you still have free will, you know, no matter what they say or do. And real awareness knows what to do, you mentioned, so that's interesting. And then as you were talking, I don't remember what it was relating to, but I see people's thought forms floating around sometimes, you could say. I see people that are just in creation and their thoughts are like visible in a way, in a sense. You can perceive them, they're floating around. And you have an opportunity to agree or not to these thoughts or accept them or not and get engaged with them, you know, but being more aware or being aware, it's cool that you can have better survival and better, you know, more opportunities, more choices to engage with people or not, and their thoughts and their ideas, which follow along with them. As you've said in the last couple of weeks, when you engage somebody, you're engaging their whole everything, you know, with what they believe and all their ideas and everything. You kind of have to manage that too, because you're managing the whole of the package. And no, so experience for, let's see, and then Duane once said, he said, you know, once you do have this view that you're outside creation, or you can be outside creation, you can play in creation. You're not burdened by it. You're not like, it's not, I mean, you still manage it and you have to deal with it, but you're not burdened by it in a way that a lot of people are. You're indifferent to it. You have more choices and opportunities, like I said before. So there's great benefits in seeing more, or seeing what creation is and how you relate to it, and how the real universes relate to it, and how you relate to both creation and the real universes. So it's a fun adventure. It's a huge adventure. It's just enormous. You can't even say anything. And Duane, even for Duane, he talks all the time about, he just feels like a little kid. He's not like, and he's dealing with the karma of all of creation, but he still feels like a little kid in terms of the enormity of it all, what the potential and the possibility of it is. It's just huge. So that was a cool experience. Duane didn't have anything to say with that one? He didn't comment on it?
He did, but I don't know if you remember, but at the time when I shared this experience, Duane was having trouble with the Skype, and so we momentarily did it on another platform, and that platform disallowed our ability to record it.
Oh.
And we attempted to record it, but it didn't save, and so unfortunately then what Duane said is lost in the mists of cause and effect time. But what I remember, what Duane did say, he spoke of the rocket ship part of the experience. He said that it wasn't me destroying it, it was more that due to the abrasive nature of the idea that it represented, that it was simply walking into the effects of itself, in that if an individual decides abrasively, they then walk into abrasive effects. So, and really then the delivery of those effects that are abrasive, which are simply that which the individual has decided, and they can take various forms, and that was simply the form that it took. And he gave the analogy, it's almost like they were ramping up something that was destructive, but it was almost the effects were managed in that destructive force was contained, and so it more or less imploded in and of itself, because it's the energies that it was unleashing, they had nowhere to go. It was, you know, almost protected sort of thing, protecting the individuals that were in the street. And so, as I said, the individual who sent it, its intentionality was destructive. That was the idea that then was then basically equaling itself, and so a destructive idea will always equal a destructive effect. And so that was how that effect could be managed, contained. Then it blew its destructive energies were more or less turned upon itself, which is what we do anyway. You know, if we decide to be abrasive, then we have decided to experience abrasiveness, and then obviously in cause and effect creation, it takes a little while to manifest, but it's instantly so on the real side. And so it's along those sort of lines. I remember him saying that, and that sort of stuck in my memory, because I thought that was a very interesting view.
Everything equals itself, he often says. So it's neat. You saw, you were working with Jeremy. So Jeremy is one of our new friends here, and like I said before, I don't have a lot of real side experiences, but I see there, you know, I get impressions and I see things, and I can see that I don't see the real side experiences coming back into the personal self. So we'll see where that goes. And you take up the slack though for a lot of us. So thank you for being the explorer here. I mean, with your experience with astral projection, you set yourself up for this, you know, and your interest in it. So the real guides are using your abilities to help us all along. So thank you again.
Yeah, like I've recounted on previous experiences, I've been shown that I've done, you know, a lot of sort of astral projection type things in previous lifetimes. So I've almost fashioned my consciousness in such a way that I have more that it's more facilitates the ability to have the real side experiences, I think. So although, as Duane said, he would never advise people taking astral projection up as a practice, although anything is experiencing creation, but obviously there are a lot of fundamental problems and fundamental risks with it. But nevertheless, for me, it did sort of facilitate the real side experiences more so than if I hadn't had done the astral projection this lifetime and previous lifetimes. And so, but everybody's different, you know. Some people may, you know, everybody's consciousness is structured differently. So, as Duane says, it's not about the experiences, it's all about the real intent, and to recognize these, and the experiences are very secondary because they're just simulation and part of the creation, and just almost like, in a way, almost a side product of the process. So
yeah, well, I just look back on my life and I see my intent, kind of see it always being, you know, wanting to be more, wake up to something, that's something else kind of idea. I've had that intent, so that's carried me, and I don't really see anything else besides this. Even if I tried to go back to, say, creation, there's nothing really there. Some thrills, but really there's nothing of interest there. If you compare it to the interesting, fun thing that this, you know, becoming more aware is, if people could only see that, they just see it as boring sometimes, like, oh, the sun's shining, what's with that, you know? I'd rather ride my four-wheeler down the beach as fast, you know, 80 miles an hour or something, or skydive or something. But it really is something of extraordinary and more, to become more aware and to have this, you know, gratitude that you are in this position. Life is exposing itself to you. it's wonderful, but it takes a while to get into this position where you are in this process of waking up. And that part, that's just that little part where you decide to do so, that's a huge part for people that have been in creation for lifetimes. And to see that, it's huge. That's why we're here. Okay, I'm ready for the next one.
In this real side experience, I would have a view of a desolated, barren, and destroyed planet, as though it had suffered a mighty cataclysm of some kind that had rendered it devoid of life. For no sign of anything natural did I see, as though everything living that once had inhabited this world had been eradicated as a result of whatever fate had befallen this planet. I was evidently being afforded this view for a reason, and my impression was that the state of that world was as it currently stands in this moment, but any details regarding the planet's identity or place of origin in creation I would not be able to determine. However, as I looked skyward, I could see debris in geostationary orbit, the debris looking very technological, like the remnants of some craft or other. As I proceeded to observe the debris floating by, it's as though time reversed for this planet as I stood there, and I was afforded a view then of what had transpired to cause this planet to be in the destroyed state it would become. For now, as I watched the skies from the same position at a point prior to the devastation, I could see the craft approaching that would later become the debris floating in the planet's orbit. It looked like some kind of capsule, and my impressions were that it were some kind of craft capable of travelling through time. As I watched on, days would pass in mere moments, and this same craft would continue to appear day after day, and fly in close proximity to this planet, utilizing its time-traveling capabilities each time to arrive from whenever time frame it had, and then to depart back to the same time frame. I'm uncertain as to where the time craft came from, who or what piloted it, and indeed the purpose for these close and continued flybys of this planet. But at some point something went terribly wrong, some miscalibration of its time-traversing technology, and this resulted in it somehow causing this planet's sun to explode, to go supernova, which in turn engulfed the planet in lethal radiation, rendering it barren of all life and destroying the time capsule in the process. The end result being a burnt-out sun, a dead world, and the remnants of the time craft that had caused this disaster to be floating around the planet. Interestingly, though, my view switched, and I was floating in deep space, and I had the impression that I was viewing once again from a time frame prior to the planet's destruction. As I watched, this very time craft would be drifting through space and on a course to the very planet that its dangerous technology miscalculations would result in the destruction of. It seemed as though then I was simply observing from another perspective what would be the same destructive outcome. But then another larger spacecraft materialized. It was hard to describe its shape. It was a mass of twinkling light and energy, but its purpose seemed to be to intercept this dangerous time-traveling craft. And so it was that it would capture the smaller time capsule in a kind of tractor beam and draw it into the body of itself, then vanish off into space at such a speed it was as though it had vanished from the scene in the blink of an eye. Overall, then, it seemed the dangerous use of time-traveling technologies had resulted in the destruction of a planet and its sun, and it's even possible it was a deliberate act. Maybe the time craft even was pilotless. But then it's as though another species with space-age technologies had taken it upon themselves to also utilize time-traveling to arrive at a point before the destruction of the planet occurred, to intercept the time capsule craft before it could be the cause of the planet's end. And so, I don't know what to make of all that, but I was shown the view, and just a verification of what we all know, of alien races and their penchant for technology, and the destructive possibilities of its misuse, especially where time-traveling is concerned. For it seems aliens are constantly popping in and out of time frames through their technologies, making adjustments, altering events for whatever purposes suit them. Obviously, the dark forces would be motivated to attempt alterations in keeping with their incessant controlling desires. As for other species, who knows what motivates them and the reasons they do what they do? For practically all these species lack awareness and recognition of their real awareness, and just because they have a technology and heightened cognitive ability doesn't mean they are any more likely to make sense through their actions with the whole of life, as they will be operating predominantly from a personal, self-serving perspective, and really, with personal self-immersed individuals, motives are rarely unselfish, regardless of how they appear on the surface. But presumably we have a situation where a timely intervention, quite literally, probably has restored a planet that was destroyed back to how it was, and now harboring the life it once had also. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "You get that viewpoint, and that is, this is what the dark forces are doing with time travel. Most people don't understand time travel. And what is basically the idea with time travel? Firstly comes the thrill of what the future will be, or let's go into the past and visit whatever and see how it was then. What most people, and even the controllers, don't realize is that when they do this, they are actually many times going into other dimensions or creating other dimensions, especially today with cyberspace. I watched a series on Netflix to where this individual with his personal life, his partners, etc., travelled to different situations. He was able to get into these other areas through this older lady, who actually was his partner, as it turned out. It was a very good series, but every time he would go into a position to want to change the events because his children were killed in a car. Well, he either missed it, or the situations were different, or when he was there, the people didn't understand. So again, what's happening with whatever's already been done is that many times you're just going into alternate dimensions. So yes, the controllers want to continually control situations, so they set up scenarios. But what they don't understand is the cause and effect of the technology they're using. And also on the real side too, I've seen them blast lasers at the sun, etc. So you have the scenario where you have a supernova destroying this planet. So I would say that is your experience. Certain good guys or the real guides come in and they take care of this thing. They displace it somewhere because it's not necessary. This time travel isn't necessary, and again, it's another distortion, because it's only in creation. No one needs to time travel because everything is now. There is past, present, future, because these are all floating ideas, and what happens is you just create more chaos when you time travel, like on a pool table, where one ball hits the other, and all of them go every which way. So as we centre ourselves now with the isness, we become all aware. We don't have to travel anywhere, because we're accessible to everything. So it's not a matter of a future, past, or what will the earth look like, or whatever. The thing is, you have a lot of free will here, so from moment to moment, you're not going to know, because people are making decisions, and it's going to go this way and that way. But overall, this adventure here with this time capsule, again, it's about control. How they can control those they have created. As we relate these experiences to other people, we get a better understanding of this and the things they've been doing, and from past lives. And the thing is, we don't need to chase thrills anymore. We don't need to do these things. All life is awareness, and we can have any position we want. We just become aware of it, and the best position, instead of staying in darkness and going into the darkness with the collapse of this creation, is to recognize yourself as a being of light where you don't have any effects. The dark forces know of individuals like Tesla who are very creative, and they want to take that creativity and utilize it for control, which is sad because it only becomes more distorted. They have the control for a moment, then they have to deal with it, and it gets out of control. Then they have to create something else to try and control it, because it's a constant cause and effect. But again, it's a learning curve for everybody. But now we're at the point where there's such a mess going on, but a lot of it's being taken care of in a particular way. But again, everyone has to figure out their position and decide how they will step up and take part. It's all in the doing, more so than just watching it. And so we're providing a real service here by letting people know you have these experiences, and to see this, and anyone can too. The universal files contain everything of actually what happens. So if we have the knowledge on the earth or not, it's okay. But if people want to know, they can learn to earn their way to the universal files and see this for themselves, and any event they wish, if they take the time to do that. But in the meantime, we have a lot to do here, because the controllers want to keep destroying the Earth. They're shooting lasers at the sun, so anything can happen any moment. So you're seeing that possibility too, and what's going on here right in front of us. Yes, the Earth is in huge jeopardy, and it's a time for people to constantly pay attention, because whatever la land they have here won't be here long, and the world controllers are going to be in their own darkness. They've decided it. So whatever they decide to do, if they threaten or mock us, etc., they're only going to end up in their own darkness, and they won't be able to create.
Regarding this Netflix series that Duane mentioned, it was very interesting. This fellow who had his kids died in a car crash, yes, and then he was trying to rationalize that somehow. He met this old lady that she prompted him, or she gave him the ability or showed him how to time travel. And like Duane says, he goes back, and each time he goes back, it's a different scenario. He tries to change the incident so they don't crash, so they live. But each time he goes back, something is tweaked, either, because each of these experiences is a different dimension, or he creates different scenarios just by where he lands. When he goes back, he lands different places each time too, in the time track. It's still in that same area where he's got a family and wife and kids, but he lands different times within that time frame. So there's all kinds of complicated, people have free will and they're doing different things and have different decisions they're making. So he always gets thwarted. He doesn't get to save them ever. Something always happens. So he comes back, and then, he realizes this old woman is his wife who came from another time. She's time traveling too, and she's trying to warn him, or she has something too that she's actually doesn't want him. She's discouraging him to do this, but she reluctantly gives him this ability to time travel. But in the meantime, she's time traveling too. And she's kind of saying it's okay, everything's okay, It was a big lesson for him when he found out that that was his wife. Older, she was much older than he was. So it's like all this stuff going, it's like you don't really need it, it's fun, it's kind of a thrill, but you don't really need this time travel idea. Like Duane says, everything is now. So you can be aware of everything now. You don't need to go anywhere to be aware of the past. You can be aware of it here and now. It's just a matter of doing so and positioning yourself in this awareness that is always here and now. It always never was. The real awareness, or the isness never was. It's never old, like Duane says. It's always new now, but it was never old. So it's interesting the way it was or is. It's just an adventure like no other. And again, encouraging everybody to read Duane's books, and again, to check out New Kevin Smith's YouTube channel. It's got a lot of information there on it. So to investigate this and start your journey to becoming more aware. Anything else, Kevin? You want to add?
Vaguely, yeah. In regards to time travel, it's quite interesting how it is, because obviously in reality there's no such thing as time. It's all in the nowness of the is, and everything's an isness. And so the only reason why there is time, and there are phases of how causes go in to effects, like a process of sequential events with one following the other, is that it is decided and agreed that that is how it is. And so in regards to the ability to time travel, if an individual was not connecting with their real awareness, of course through the real awareness, therefore they are in a position of everything anyway, and so can access everything in creation regardless of when it took place. But absent of that, the only way in theory then an individual could time travel would be they would have to retract the agreements that also lock them into the same idea of agreed to time. Then presumably then they would be able to travel, they would be able to pop in and out of time and back into any other point they want, because aliens are able to do that with their technology, and they can move in and out of time phases, like Duane said in the response to that experience, how they use this dangerous technology to do as they do, and they try and alter things that have happened in what they would construe as the past, but what simply is a cause that has rippled through to an effect that then follows through the sequences as how creation is constructed. But But it's quite interesting how time is, because it seems as though it's decided that time exists, but that is somehow involved with a certain in regards to humans. It seems that the time is involved with the frequency band of visible light, and that seems to contain the decided to sort of time illusion. And so it has been theorized that in order to time travel technologically, you would have to move something beyond the speed of light, which would represent then moving beyond the frequency that the human physical level experience is contained within. That incorporates time as well. And so that seems to be what the technology of the controllers do. They have the ability to move beyond the speed of light, and therefore they are moving beyond the decided upon human consciousness bubble experience, which also is the agreement to time. And then they can then access any part of the consciousness of the overall human experience by simply reinserting, by simply then slowing, by simply then returning back to the into the visible light spectrum and popping their ships back in at any point that they want. And yeah, something like that anyway.
Let's see, I just lost it. I was thinking of this kickboxer, the actor that played Kickboxer, and Claude Van Damme. Remember that he had a movie where the movie started where they went back in time to get this gold shipment, steal this gold shipment in the 1800s. Did you see that movie at all?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it was. See, it was like, the intent, it was to steal and to distort, for their own benefit. So actually, this is, in a way, it's very simple. They try to complicate time travel by, just like the elites try to complicate economy, financial system. They make it sound really complicated. Physics and all this stuff. It's really, in a way, it's kind of simple. But they put up this front the way it is, but it's not that. It's just basically seeing it, and seeing it because it's all here and now. So, and this movie just implies that these people are creating karma for themselves by just their thought of time travel. And this movie depicted they were actually doing it physically, but just the thought itself creates ripples, and it exists somewhere, and the movie kind of made it reality. So anyway, my point I'm trying to say is just it's probably simpler than what it is. We can complicate things a lot, but it's just seeing it, seeing the past, seeing the future, or the possibilities of it. And it's whatever, it's like you're playing around with it, but you don't have to. And everything is now. So that's, focus on now, and you've got everything. You got everything you need right now. If that made any sense, but that's all I got.
Yeah, and it's like, it's the consciousness that contains all the so-called laws and restrictions of physical level creation. And so to move out of the consciousness, you're no longer resigned to whatever those laws might be, whatever they could be, of gravity or anything along those lines. So with these individuals who access their ethereal vehicle, which is the seat of the psychic sciences, that is the imagination vehicle, which is aside from the consciousness. And so that's how they can then seemingly manipulate creation and all these amazing things that seem to be in violation of the laws of physics. Well, all that is not in violation of them. It is simply they have moved from a position of the consciousness where they are no longer agreeing with it, and so it no longer dictates their simulation. And so they can now manipulate it and seemingly do whatever they want. And I suspect time travel would be along similar lines. they've moved outside of the agreement to a consciousness which limits them to time as everybody else is on the physical level, and so therefore they will then be possibly then have the ability to travel through time as such.
The magicians use this too. They make deals with the entities, the astral entities, to do their tricks. You know, they have arrangements so that you can, you know, perceptions. They alter perceptions of people. You know, they bring through the astral, and the consciousness is altered for people through these agreements magicians make with astral entities that know how these things work. You know, so it's kind of interesting too.
I just wanted to add briefly in regards to magician. I once saw a magician's trick. I think it was on a video on YouTube where he said that where he would point out that how if you alter the consciousness of an individual, that can also alter their abilities to perceive things or not perceive things. So they could, a magician, if he's very skilled at doing this, could have individuals seeing things that were there or indeed were not there. And he actually gave a demonstration. He brought an individual from the audience onto the stage, and he showed them a watch, and he held it up before the individual and says, "Can you see this?" And he goes, "Yes." "And can you tell me the time on it?" And he read it off, and it was correct. And then he put him in a hypnotic trance and altered his consciousness through his abilities to do this. And then he had this individual's daughter stand between the individual who was hypnotized and the magician holding the watch. And so the daughter would represent something that would be obscuring his ability to see the watch. But he had hypnotized the individual that he could not perceive his daughter. And when he asked him to see the watch, he was able to see and read the time of the watch, even though his daughter was standing between him and the individual. So it goes to show there's unlimited potentiality for manipulation of not only the consciousness, but of our perceptions, what we can see or we can't see. And this was just a sort of stage show magician. So as you can imagine, the world controllers with their eons of capabilities and technology, what the sort of veils of illusion they could pull down over the eyes of humanity, and indeed they have done so through their cyberspace overlaps.
Yeah, and on a mundane level, you see this term confirmation bias, where people just see what they want to see. You can tell them stuff, you can show them evidence, you can relate statistics, but they're not going to see it because they are set in their way. They're self-hypnotized in a way to what they've agreed to. So that's like a mundane example, you know, of what's going on here. And what are you going to do? Get to trick people too, like real guides trick people, you know, in a good way for the benefit of everybody. But it's kind of fun in a way to do, to play around with this. If you have the good intent, you know, if you have an intent that's real. Well, thank you, Kevin. Again, it's great to listen to your experiences. Keep it up. We'll sing the new you, and see you around. Okay, so it's new you.
New